Everyone. So anybody who doesn't know, my name is Dan Davidson. I'm the president of TAMA as of last year. I got that COVID election that happened last year. So many of you may not have been aware of that or met me, but I really appreciate everyone joining. We're really starting to ramp up TAMA activities this year. Also, we have a great new partnership with the Tennessee Chamber. So appreciate Bradley Jackson and his entire team. They're really supporting and helping us on a lot of the logistics, administrative, other areas, and that's why you see us able to do this with the resources and benefit that they've got. So today we've got two fantastic speakers. The first one is Dr. William Fox or Bill Fox. So anybody who doesn't know Dr. Fox is a great, partner and advisor and ambassador, if you will, for the state of Tennessee. He works at the University of Tennessee in the Department of Economics and Global Supply Chain. He's the Randy and Jenny Boyd Distinguished Professor and the Director of the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research. His expertise is in public economics and taxation and economic development. He has bachelor's degrees from Miami University, Ohio, and then also a master's and doctorate from Ohio State University, or I should say the Ohio State University. As a Michigan guy, I know the proper way to say it. Dr. Fox has held visiting appointments as a professor at the University of Hawaii. Sounds like a great place. Scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, distinguished Fulbright scholar at the University of Frankfurt, Germany. In addition, he served as a consultant in over 40 countries and 15 US states on a wide range of public policy issues. Dr. Fox is a member of the American Economic Association and past president and recipient of the Stephen D. Gold Award from the National Tax Association. So Dr. Fox, we're really looking forward, and I know I've had a chance to hear you in the past. So thank you so much for your time today, and I really appreciate your sharing with us.
Daniel, thank you very much for allowing me to be here. It's certainly my privilege. Let me just get myself hooked up here. Okay, so hopefully now you're only seeing one version of it. I'm looking at three versions, and so just trying to keep me confused as to where I'm at any point in time. Thanks for letting me join you today. It's certainly my privilege, and I'm going to sort of show some slides and talk about the economy, but I'm really interested in what you all say and think. So I'd love to hear. And if you have a question or two, I'd be happy to answer them, but I'd love to hear your comments on it as well, and my thinking, particularly as we get towards the end of my comments. So let me start by saying I am the rarest of beings right now because I'm an optimistic economist. And you don't hear that very often, but here I am. And I'm optimistic, first of all, because COVID happened and the federal government threw huge amounts of money at the problem. And okay, we could quibble over whether it's too much, too little, but it was a lot of money and it was really fast. And if they had done nothing, I think we would have had a disaster. And so the outcome is the economy is going to boom this year and likely next year. Secondly, I'm optimistic because it looks like good things are happening on the vaccine front and on the COVID front, and so that's reason to hope that people are more willing to come out. And thirdly, there's enormous pent-up demand for certain kinds of things in the economy. I mean, the thing about COVID is it's been incredibly uneven as to how it affected geography and industries and people. And so people are sitting with a lot of pent up demand for the things that they couldn't do. And so that's reason to be hopeful. Now, of course, economists always have, well, on the other hand, the two other hands that I would just note is, first of all, does COVID with some kind of variant creep up in the fall or the winter and cause some problems at that point in time? It's obviously a risk that I'm not the right one to assess. And the second one is, people are worried about inflation. I don't think inflation is an issue here. I think inflation is, in the economist lingo, anchored about 2%. That is, we think it's going to be about 2%, so it tends to be 2%. If you only think inflation is going to be 2%, you might raise your wages or your prices 2%, and that keeps inflation from getting out of hand. There are some examples. We all know them. Procter & Gamble came out the other day and said, hey, we're going to raise the prices of diapers and a bunch of our products. And we've all seen paper products go up, and we've seen oil come up recently, and these kinds of things. So we have examples of big price increases. But inflation is not examples of big price increases. It's across the board, broad price increases that are endemic, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And so again, is there reason to be concerned about inflation? Of course there is. Have we been surprised in the economy before? Of course we have. And so it's something to track and monitor. I will note the Fed actually wants the inflation rate to be above 2% for a while, because their policy now is, let's have inflation average 2%. Well, we've just had a decade of inflation rates under 2%. So to average 2%, we need a few months or years of inflation above 2%. And so the Fed actually is okay with the kind of 2.5% inflation we may see in coming months. Okay, with those introductory comments, let me just go through and talk a bit about what's happening around the nation, a little bit about what's happening in the state and in the local areas, and then where I see things going. So GDP has been all over the place, as you can see here. The reality is this year, we're going to have GDP grow at least 6%, which is an extraordinarily fast year for GDP growth. And so things are going to boom. And the stimulus money is going to be spent across multiple years. And so we're going to see it in 22 as well with pretty good economic growth, let's say 4.5%. And some of that money is still going to get spent in 23. You know, they gave schools in Tennessee, and this is just an example, $4.5 billion to spend across 3 years. That tells us out into 23, some of that federal stimulus money is still going to be spent. And here's an example of the stimulus money. It's over $5 trillion that has been appropriated so far. We don't know for sure. Will there be an infrastructure bill? And your guesses on that are at least as good as mine. But we know what's already out there, and big parts of this are getting spent. Now, of course, the outcome is massive federal deficits, over $3 trillion a year for 2 consecutive years. Now, I'm bothered by that, but let me note that my bigger concern actually is, if you look at this chart, our recession years, that if you look down there, 2009, 10, and now 20 and 21, where we had the massive stimulus programs, but look at the size of the deficits when we don't have a big stimulus program going on. And so we have a broader problem. Let's not think, okay, COVID is the US government's fiscal problem. It certainly has added to it, but we're doing $1 trillion plus forever, given current taxes and spending, and given our demographics, which say a whole bunch of us become Social Security and Medicare eligible in the next decade or so. And that's driving up those deficits out there. One of the outcomes of the economy growing fast and expectation of somewhat higher inflation is, beyond the really short term, which the Fed is controlling, interest rates are beginning to rise and get higher. And they've kind of stabilized for the moment, but still much higher than they were this time last year. That's, again, the result of expectation of more inflation, a little bit stronger economy, both causing that to happen. We also have seen oil prices come back up as another example of some of the countervailing forces that happen as the economy grows. This is employment change, compares Tennessee with the US. I know you all find it a coincidence that Tennessee happens to be represented by orange in this, but Tennessee's orange, US is blue. And you can see that, yeah, we're down, but not nearly as much as the US economy. But still, keep this in mind. There are 85,000 fewer people working in Tennessee today than were working in Tennessee a year ago. This is a lot of people, obviously, and a bunch of those people are in industries where they're simply not going to have jobs at the other end. Certain kinds of retailing, certain kinds of hospitality and retailing as examples of that, places where technology has come in. And so we do have a problem finding jobs for other people. And at the same time, and I'll show you here in a moment, the unemployment rate, we have a tight labor force. And so it's a really unusual mix that's going on. This is unemployment insurance claims. They were announced this morning, up 13,000. If you look at the history of this, we've only had a few months in history where it was 13,000 before COVID. So this was a really big week. And you can see lots of weeks that high since essentially almost every week since COVID started. But the people who are going on UI today, it looks like many of them are people who were laid off because of COVID effects a year ago. Their year has now transpired. They can reapply, or they think they can reapply for unemployment insurance, but they may not qualify. So that the share of these people applying right now who qualify might actually be pretty low. Now, one of the messages again about the COVID situation is the unevenness with which it's hit the economy by industry and by geography. And it just to give you some examples, no particular order to these states, except we found some high winds and some low winds. New York has lost 9% of its employment still after months of recovery. Iowa and Utah, on the other hand, have seen growth. Tennessee ranks pretty well among the states, but obviously, as you can see from this, we're not the best in terms of job loss. Unemployment rate, it's 5%. We'd have thought 5% pretty high 18 months ago, given how high it got at the worst parts of COVID. It's extraordinary that we're down to 5%. But a big part of that is a whole bunch of people dropped out of the labor force. And it tended to be people who are caring for their children or their parents or other older people around them, excuse me, or sick people. A bunch of them were people who were afraid. A bunch of them, their jobs haven't come back. And a problem is that a significant share, maybe something over half, are people who are now long-term unemployed. And getting the long-term unemployed a job, working again, their skills erode, their confidence erodes, you don't want to hire them. And the outcome is it's hard to get them back at working again. And so while the unemployment rate's still a bit higher than we want, and we still have 85,000 fewer people working than a year ago, the labor force is tight in many places. And the people we have who aren't working, who are looking for jobs, tend not to have the right skills and to be in the right place. And so we have a big problem continuing with the labor force and with workers. This is employment by industry. I usually don't do this, but I added transportation equipment just so you could see where your industry lies in this. Most industries are still lower than they were a year ago, but transportation, and again, this is think trucking. And I go to Nashville a lot, and I'm fighting with the trucks on my way over there all the way, right? And you all see the same thing. I mean, trucking has done great. The science part of professional and business services has done great, but most of our industries still have fewer workers, including manufacturing, and transportation equipment's a little worse than average among manufacturing in terms of having fewer workers than you had a year ago. This shows employment effects by county, just to give you a flavor for that. And you can see it differs pretty widely, just depends where you are. I actually, this is my second talk of the day already. And I was talking to a bunch of East Tennessee folks, and you can see in the middle of East Tennessee, the employment losses are not as bad as in most of the state. They tend to be worse in the area around Middle Tennessee. But of course, the economy longer term has still been stronger in Middle Tennessee. Taxes, give you a picture of that as a person who thinks with the government about taxes. Okay, so the thing I've said is, as I've worked my way through the pandemic over the last 14 months and worked with lots of policymakers in lots of different areas, it has played out differently from anything we've seen in a whole bunch of ways, almost every way, to be honest. Taxes is certainly an example of that. And you can see, if you look back at 2009-10, you can see we had 2 consecutive really big losses in tax revenues. We had some months, but no years of losses in tax revenues in the COVID era. And in fact, this way understates how strong taxes are. This is based on a revenue estimate I did a couple of months ago, but taxes are booming. Now we have some examples: the gasoline tax, the diesel taxes, mostly the vehicle taxes are underperforming a year ago. The mixed drink taxes in restaurants and bars is underperforming, but the sales tax and the corporate taxes are doing extraordinarily well. Here's the sales tax as an example of that. You can see, we had 15% growth 2 months ago. We had 8% last month. This month looks like it's going to be really good again, because now we're comparing ourselves with a year ago when the COVID world was around us and a lot of things weren't open. And so we're going to see really strong sales tax growth rates for the next couple of months. Now, here's kind of what happened. And I was going to show you the March to March data on this. It's out. I actually have a copy of the slide in it, but I wasn't going to show it to you because, by comparison with March of a year ago, almost everything is booming. But this is what happened in the pandemic. At the top, non-store retailers, think e-commerce. That was just booming, as we all know. We had things like that we did around our homes, like sporting goods or fixing things in our kitchen that did really super during that window. And then, the restaurants closed down and the gasoline stations didn't sell very much gas. And so a really big difference across industries. Now, this is light vehicle sales. And one thing I learned a long time ago was never talk to people about something they know better than you. And so I'm certainly not going to try to talk to you a lot about what's happening in the automobile industry, except at the end on the technology side. But you can see light vehicle sales now running in the 16 million range. We hit about 18 million back 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And of course have been slowly eroding since then. COVID did take a real hit on the industry in the middle of last year. Again, you all understand your supply chain problems better than I do, but I know that this remains an issue for you that's going to take some months to solve. And so that's kind of what happened to sales. Now, the thing that happened to tax revenues, particularly sales tax, I'll mention this quickly. Tennessee began in October of 2019 to collect sales taxes on the sales by remote vendors in our state that were big. So companies like Wayfair, Amazon and Walmart were already collecting on their own sales, but firms like Wayfair began to collect in October of 19. And then marketplaces like eBay, Amazon, Walmart began to collect on all sales, regardless of who the vendor was, beginning in October of 20. This is self-identified firms that began collecting for us in this window. And you can see we're now getting $60 million a month or more from these firms that weren't collecting before. And so this is actually a big part of what's happened on the sales tax side, besides the fact that what happened, people shifted from buying non-taxable things like elective healthcare and travel and started buying things like Pelotons, which are sales tax. This is kind of what's happened by counties, and the counties have done really well as a result of that. So let me just mention a couple of trends, and then I'll be happy to answer a couple of questions if you have them. First of all, I think the retail and restaurant business has really shifted. Lots of firms have filed for bankruptcy. As you know, they won't all go out of business, but they'll transform how they do things. Employment's been impacted. Best Buy had a good year last year and laid off 5,000 workers in January. Secondly, a big part of the way in which retail space gets used is getting really transformed. Target's a great example. Target more than doubled its e-commerce sales last year. 95% of those sales were fulfilled by their stores. Look at the grocery stores where people buy online and pick up at the store. What's happening is we're increasingly using many of these vendors as fulfillment centers. And of course, what happens today is Walmart or somebody, Target, pay somebody to put the stuff on the shelf and somebody else to take it back off. That's not the world that's going to keep happening. Their technology is going to allow them to use their stores much more as fulfillment centers. And so we'll change how the space is used. And of course, all the remote technologies that have influenced the way in which we work and the way in which we clean and the role of AI, all transition. None of this is new. It just was accelerated. And all of this changes our need for labor and says that the role for workers in the economy has really transitioned. Then just a quick comment on where I see technology going, and I'm going to talk about the automobile industry. And again, I'd be delighted to hear any responses you have. The main point of this chart, without going into the detail, is the adoption rate of technologies has massively accelerated. So when people tell me that autonomous vehicles won't get accepted fast and so on. I said, well, wait a minute. I mean, I might have thought that about smartphones too, but trust me, they got adopted really fast. Well, you know, asking people today would I use an autonomous vehicle means nothing because none of us have seen it. But once we see one, then that could be a whole different world. Now, here's why this matters from an economics perspective. Here's our assessment of the share of the economy that's linked to vehicles. And okay, so 3% roughly of our employment is manufacturing, but almost 5% is supporting vehicle. So this is insuring and financing and cleaning and all that kind of stuff. And 14% is people who are driving vehicles very heavily in their job. You know, they might be driving trucks or taxis where that's all they do. They might be an ambulance driver and just go through the list. And so huge linkages, you all know this, huge linkages of the vehicles to the economy. And, you know, I envision a world in which we move to autonomous vehicles. Now, I'm not a technical expert, as you know, I'm an economist, but in this new world, what I imagine is, first of all, autonomous cars that are electric and that are owned in fleets. Why would I own a car, an autonomous car, and use it 2 hours a day when I can have the fleet provide it whenever I need it? Now, here's a couple of examples of implications of that. First of all, this is the share of tax revenues. I did a study. It's available either in the Pew Foundation's website or it's in an academic journal that looks at 6 states and said, well, how important are vehicle taxes to the states? And here, you know, here are 6 of them. This is the share of taxes I see them losing. So states like Texas and Tennessee lose nearly 1/10 of their tax revenues as we move to electric autonomous vehicles. And this is just an example of my analysis for Tennessee. You know, the numbers aren't important. You know, we have no gasoline tax revenues. We have no motor fuel tax revenues. We have no gasoline inspection. We have fewer vehicles, so we get less sales tax revenues and so forth. And we make it up a little bit with this $100 a vehicle electric tax. Electric vehicle tax. And so big reductions in the tax revenues of many states, almost every state. And states are going to be looking at how to deal with it. And of course, you know, here's the 3 options that come to my mind. The first one, and this is the one I actually prefer, is to move from a situation where we're taxing vehicles or fuel to where we're taxing the use of vehicles. So if they're all owned in fleets, then we simply tax the price paid for the fleet service. Second thing would be to use a vehicle miles traveled tax and of some kind or another. So those are kind of my comments. I'd be happy to respond. I think that's all that I had. Yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about. I'd be happy to respond to questions or comments or hear you tell me why I'm right or wrong on my view of autonomous vehicles.
Really appreciate it, Dr. Fox. I'll just make a comment to say, please put your questions in the chat box. So I should have said that up front, but if you have any questions, please put those in there. One thing I'll ask Dr. Fox, a lot of our members are, you know, manufacturers in the state, and we're all, I think, going through a challenge to hire people, to be honest, even though you're showing the unemployment rate is still above pre-pandemic levels, we are struggling, right? I think that's happening dramatically across the manufacturing industry. And the other thing we're seeing is wage inflation. I just wondered, could you make any comments on wage inflation? What do we expect to see from that standpoint, maybe going forward?
Yeah, so Daniel, I certainly appreciate your concern about the labor force. The data just don't reflect what's happening in the labor force today. I'll be honest and say that because, you know, an unemployment rate, it's the number who are unemployed divided by the labor force. So when that denominator goes down, the unemployment rate, you know, moves with it. And so what's happened is not only have we gotten a reduction in the numerator, but we've gotten this reduction in the denominator, in the workforce. And that's just getting lost in this. And again, the workers that are available tend not to have the right skills and be in the right place. And so, I mean, what does an economist expect in that world? We expect to see some wage inflation. Because if you want workers and you need them badly enough, what do? You pay them more. Now, the evidence suggests that at this point, that wage inflation is about the same it was before the pandemic. and so sort of 3.5%, something like that. So I mean, in my view, it hasn't gotten out of hand. I'm not hiring people, I'm just telling you from an economist side, it's kind of back where we were. It hasn't gotten extraordinary. Again, I think the challenge here, and I know you all recognize this, the states have a really big role to play in developing labor forces. That, I hope Governor Lee and others in the General Assembly really focus on the technical schools and building them up. They have a lot of money available right now. That would be a great approach right now because we need the workers. And I wish I could say to you, well, okay, as soon as COVID is over, this problem is gone, because the reality is the demographics all work against us. What's going to happen from now for at least the next 2 decades is that the share of the economy that's in traditional working ages shrinks. What we have is a rapidly aging population and really low birth rates. You put those two things together, and few people coming out of high schools, even now, you put those two together, we need every person in the workforce. We cannot afford to have anybody drop out. So I don't have any short-term hope for you. I don't think it's going to, just suddenly improve. But I do, and I know everybody says, well, it's the unemployment insurance system. The reality is there's only about 40,000 workers in Tennessee on UI right now. And some of them laid off relatively recently. Are there people who are trying to get the money because the federal government is paying them extra? Probably. I'm not saying it's zero. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's a more basic problem, again, with many people dropping out because of caring for their children or whatever.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you very much. We have a few questions coming in. First question was, what is your outlook on commercial office space? Is work from home going to end up being permanent?
I think the answer is yes. Work from home is going to be permanent, but that doesn't mean a massive share of the economy is going to work only from home. Mm-hmm. And so, what I expect is a lot more leniency. And frankly, we're at University of Tennessee. I run this research center. We got about 20 people, and we're addressing the very same thing. Most of our workers have spent most of their time at home, and we're going to end up somewhere in between with people coming in, 3 or 4 days a week and working from home on a flexible basis. So that flexible part of that, I think, will be really important. I think we will see an acceleration of the share of the population that truly does work remotely. But in the office space, I mean, you do have this offsetting implication here because, I'm concerned about being too close to people. So that argues I want more space around me, and I don't want shared space as much as in the past. But I'm going to guess that our memories about some of this stuff are going to fade over the next couple of years. And I think that shrinks down commercial office space going forward. And by the way, the autonomous vehicle phenomenon, I think will alter these kinds of things as well, because what will happen as autonomous vehicles come online is our need for parking will shrink. And so, and something like 15 to 20% of the space in big cities is parking. And so what we're going to do is open up a lot of free space over the next 2 decades in cities that will also impact commercial markets. So I think we're going to see a lot of transition in the commercial office space. It's not my area of expertise, but that's how I see the economics of it.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions. As we approach the electric vehicle demand and AVs, do you expect the need for manufacturers to hire more technical talent?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what's going to happen? Of course, you all are, I'm sure, already looking for it. No question. The value added in vehicles has been shifting right forever. But the value, as we move to electric and autonomous, the value added and all the devices you are putting on, even before they're truly autonomous, the value added is around technology and technical workers and research. And I think all the pressure on this is just more and more. And so the challenge will be to hire those workers. The good news for Tennessee and the governor and the General Assembly have recognized that where we're headed, as you all know, with Volkswagen and GM already announcing electric vehicles being manufactured here, battery production coming to Tennessee, we've made some good steps because the stuff the parts particularly that go into internal combustion engines, a lot of those are going to go away. And about 2/3 of our employment in the manufacturing of vehicles in Tennessee is parts. And many of those are in rural places. And so I'm wondering how this plays out. But yes, much more focus on technology in the vehicles,
Right.
no question.
Got it. Got it. We are running short on time. Maybe I'll just pick one more question. I apologize for those. Appreciate all the questions coming in. But what type of operating infrastructure do you anticipate supporting the move toward autonomous vehicles? How will you summon your car? Who insures it? How will it work in rural communities compared to more urban and suburban area places? I know Tennessee has a large rural population, and so just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So that's a combination of infrastructure and sort of regulation and all this kind of stuff. So I can imagine a world in which the General Assembly or Congress would act to say, let's slow down this autonomous vehicle thing because we don't want this to happen. And my take on it is the rest of the world's going to do this. So we have a choice. We can either be a leader in this industry or we can follow. I'd a whole lot rather us be a leader in what I see is clearly going to be an emerging industry. So I hope what we don't get is legislation that keep us from doing what we need. So obviously we need electric charging capacity, but as you go in the long term, what I can imagine taking place is with these vehicles being owned in fleets. It's not like everybody needs this at their house. The fleet companies will figure out how to manage their fleet using AI so that they can charge. There will always be some that are doing charging. At some point, you'll probably end up with charging capacity in the streets themselves. You'll end up with very smart traffic signs and cars talking to each other and so forth. So the technology needs here are really big. I think the rural areas, I'm concerned about them. And that's one of the reasons that we need to think now about how are we going to impose taxes on the vehicle industry, because the winners up front on this are clearly going to be the big cities. And the people in New York City would take the autonomous cars today, right? It's a group of young people who would be in it. They're not afraid. They'll do it right away, and it'll be easy and fast for them. But Nashville will be a quick adopter of autonomous vehicles as well. And rural places, for a lot of reasons, they won't happen there. But the dynamics of this say, as we move to electric vehicles, gasoline stations will become less available. People to repair traditional cars will become less available. And so what we end out with is traditional ways of taxing vehicles, gasoline taxes. The rural places still pay, Nashville doesn't. And so we need to think about today, how do we accommodate a world, first of all, a world which will have both kinds of vehicles on the road for the next 25 or 30 years. So it's this transition that is really challenging. And how do we have a world that treats evenly both people by income, but also by geography? It's a challenging world, but it's the world we're going to. And so we need to be in front of it and not behind it.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, Dr. Fox, and thanks so much for spending time with us today, and appreciate it. We apologize to everyone we didn't get to every single question, but I do think very good information, and we appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So Carolyn, we have.
You're good. You're good to go. I think Victoria is ready. And Victoria, share your screen, and if something happens, I got your back.
Well, let me do a quick introduction, Victoria. So just for anybody who's not aware, Victoria Hirschberg is the Director of Business Development for the Tennessee Economic Community Development, ECD. She's been a really great partner for TAMA. She manages projects and investments within the automotive and manufacturing sectors for Tennessee ECD. She serves as a facilitator for corporate decision makers in executing Tennessee's strategy for growth expansion. She's done projects with Nokian Tires, Altium, LG Electronics, Herotech, Vanpool, among others. Prior to that, she served as a business development consultant in the greater Nashville area, where she assisted with company expansions and providing or fostering stakeholder relationships. She began her service in 2012 and previously worked in similar roles in South Texas and New Mexico. She received the Site Selectors Guild of Excellence Award for her work with LG Electronics and was named the top 40 under 40 in economic development by the International Economic Development Council and Development Counselors International. Outside the office, she serves as a mentor with Tennessee Achieves, in Davidson County and a running buddy for Girls on the Run. So really appreciate Victoria joining us today, and very excited to hear what's the status and what's upcoming in Tennessee for ECD.
All right. Thank you, Dan. It's good to see some friendly faces. Could everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Could you see my screen? I got to like check these things in 2021, right?
Yep. It's all good.
So nice to see everyone. Nice, happy for ECD to be represented on this kind of Tennessee Chamber TAMA event. Glad to see some positive changes. I don't know about anybody else, but I was frantically like taking notes during Dr. Fox's presentation, because I think about where we all were last year at this time in 2020, how the world has changed and how everything continues to evolve. While last year we were worried about COVID testing and just what COVID even was, and watching things systematically shut down and trying to reopen. Now we are in a space where worldwide logistics and shipping is completely wacky. There's a chip shortage that is halting production of automotive, and you all know that and live it and breathe it every day. Building materials, you can't get steel anymore, and all of these different challenges that we're all facing as a state, including some of the issues on the labor force that Dr. Fox just alluded to. And those are issues that we deal with every day at the Department of Economic and Community Development when we're working with our existing industries and companies that are considering a location in Tennessee. And the switch, this transition that has particularly occurred in the last 2 years, but I feel we've seen has really increased in the past couple of months, has been the switch to the focus on the electric vehicle. And so I'll give a quick presentation, tell you what we're doing at the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, answer some questions, and again, we're here to really support our existing industries, help new industries, and so I do want to hear from you all. So please share any questions, and I'll take it from here. So just anyone who isn't familiar with my department, the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, we have two purposes, and one is to help create prosperity for Tennesseans through job creation, through new investment strategies, and that's working with our existing industries across the state, and it's above and beyond automotive, but we help with everything from supply chain assistance, permitting. We kind of serve as that single point of contact for existing industries and new companies. I say sometimes I'm a connector, I'm a cheerleader, I'm a therapist, I'm all of those things on any given day. Because all of those things are important to working with our companies and importantly, our communities as well. Just some fun facts about the automotive industry. It is Tennessee's #1 manufacturing sector. It impacts 88 of our 95 counties through either an OEM or tier 3 supplier. It is very important, and these changes are very important to us, but there's a distribution map that you all can see. Here are some of our companies that have been around for 40 years. I mean, we're coming to a legacy industry. And so it's really important as we switch, as Dr. Fox just mentioned, as we go from the engine to the combustion engine to the battery, what does that mean as that continues to evolve for some of these existing suppliers that are very much in our rural communities? So that's something we are definitely watching. I feel like this map is continually getting updated. I think I heard a stat years ago up in event in Traverse City with the Center for Automotive Research, and they were like, literally the automotive industry is shifting 10 miles south every year. And so we're continuing to see those investments, and we're very fortunate in terms of OEMs that we have Nissan, GM, and Volkswagen in our state, but that's certainly the ability to access numerous OEMs in the Southeast. And that's where you've seen a lot of the major announcements in the past couple of years has been in the Southeast. So it certainly is a partnership, and TAMA is part of a greater network as well. And we're part of greater networks as well when it comes to some of these greater supply chain and regional workforce type issues. Some fun facts about, and some of these numbers, I'll be honest, we've watched them change as well as production continues to kind of ebb and flow, as you all know, in the automotive sector. I think if you looked at this slide, maybe 18 months ago, it was like 900,000 plus vehicles. So we are trying to keep our stats up to date, but honestly, it's very fluid right now. Let me give you a little bit about what we're doing in the EV space. So we started talking about the switch to electric vehicles a couple of years ago, but it was kind of a silo effect. One, there's still only 11,000 EVs registered in the state of Tennessee. We were fortunate that Nissan Leaf was an early adopter. So we've had production of an EV in our state for a long time. We had their Nissan's former battery plant. It's still a battery plant, just under a different ownership now, but that's been in our state since the mid 2000s. But it's really now that we're starting to see the real push from across the board at the different OEMs. And so probably since 2019, we started to see some of the nearshoring of the batteries and how do we bring these to the United States. So what I will share a little bit right now is what we're doing in this electric vehicle space. So what's been announced kind of just, right before COVID, during COVID, is that all three of our OEMs will have an EV product. Nissan will continue with the Leaf. They've made some redesigns in the past. Volkswagen announced their crossover, the ID.4, and GM just announced the Cadillac Lyriq that if you drive past the Spring Hill facility, it's incredible. You can see the steel coming out of the ground right now for another 1 million+ square feet of production space for this new electric product. And the Cadillac brand will be all electric. That's GM's near term, and they've have very aggressive goals. So that's exciting news. The next exciting point, you probably heard last week, the largest capital investment in automotive Tennessee history was the announcement of Ultium, which is the joint venture between GM and LG Energy out of South Korea, will build their second battery plant in Spring Hill, Tennessee, a co-location on the GM property. It was $2.3 billion and 1,300 jobs. And I will tell you, a lot of people are like, oh my God, 1,300 new jobs. That's great. We got to find the people. And I want to get back to this, but I wrote the note about Dr. Fox's comment about right skills, right place. And that's something that really resonated with me. But Ultium will be our third lithium ion plant. In February, we had an announcement of another plant. Microvast will be building their first US facility over in Clarksville, Tennessee. And of course, we have Envision AESC, which was the former Nissan asset that's in Smyrna. So we will have 3 lithium ion battery plants all within 1 hour of Nashville. So a lot of momentum in that. For the moment, we're claiming 40% of the Southeast EV manufacturing. Of course, that stat's ever evolving. SK Innovation, we all watched the ITC and that ruling, and of course the settlement that happened. So SK is building batteries in Georgia. Mercedes and BMW are building electric vehicles. So we're really, again, of course, I work for the state of Tennessee. My focus is Tennessee, but there is very much a regional approach of how we're working with these companies. And we have 16,000 electric vehicles built annually here, majority being the Nissan Leaf, with those numbers projected to change. So there's a lot going on. And we always say that when I talk to my colleagues, not even just ECD, but in other sister state agencies like environment and conservation, even, we talk about fleet, the state of Tennessee, we have a fleet. We're looking at electrifying our fleet as well through the Department of General Services. So we're really trying to build the ecosystem, not only in state government, but also with partners like TAMA, the Tennessee Chamber, Oak Ridge National Lab in East Tennessee, so that when companies want to do business here, or they have the ecosystem to really succeed. So what does that mean? You need charging infrastructure, and we're grateful for our partners at TVA and TDEC that just released a competitive $20 million RFP to increase EV infrastructure across the state of Tennessee on major thoroughfares, rural and urban communities. Our major cities, Nashville, Chattanooga, Memphis, Knoxville, all have very aggressive fleet electrification models. So a lot going on, but our goal is that we want to make Tennessee the #1 state to build, own, and drive electric vehicles. And there's a lot going on in that space. If anyone is not familiar with Drive Electric Tennessee, I highly encourage you to go check it out. But that has been a driving principle, really a driving strategic plan that has been spearheaded by folks at TDEC, TVA, TDOT, and a lot of private interests as well, with an aggressive goal of having 200,000 electric vehicles on Tennessee roads by 2028. As I mentioned, we're probably now at about just over 10,000. But so again, if you look at the slide, driving infrastructure awareness, policy, availability, it's all part of it. And how do we get to that goal? And we're starting, again, we've been talking about this for a while, but now we're seeing the commitments from the companies and the OEMs to really push forward with electric vehicles. there you see it registered about 11,000 in 2020. And there's the models of the cars that will be produced here. This is an interesting slide. We have the aggressive goal of 200,000, and we're doing okay. We're kind of on par with our southeastern partners or peer states. Of course, EVs, popular in states like California, Arizona. A lot of that's Tesla. But we feel that we, as a southeastern state, with all the ecosystem that we're building and the recent announcements and the anticipated, and just having such an automotive legacy like Tennessee does, that we're seeing companies like Denso, retool and shift toward new components and new processes to fit the new manufacturing for the EV. So we're hopeful that our automotive legacy will continue to drive and get more people in EVs and get more companies here in this space. Our partners, again, like my job is to help on the build side of build, own, and drive vehicles. But there's a lot of people that we work with every day collectively to make it that state. And here's a list of them. We talk about Oak Ridge National Lab, 10 Smart, really focusing on mobility, and of course, TAMA and Tennessee Chamber Partnership. A couple of fun things going back to that ecosystem we're building. We're working on electrifying all 56 state parks across the state of Tennessee. It's kind of a state of Tennessee tourism. If anyone knows, in COVID, I think I've been to more state parks, which is a wonderful thing, but certainly everyone has been, our state parks are having a record year. So how do we get more EV drivers to go out there, be able to charge their cars, go hike the fiery gizzard and have a great day? So that's a plan that's underway right now. Of course, the sustainability goals of companies through electricity, air, and fuel are all really important. TVA has done a great job, and for any company, for a current manufacturer looking to meet sustainability goals, meet renewable energy goals through their electricity, TVA is our partner in that, and they have really retooled what they could offer companies as well. And highly encourage everyone to get to know the Green Invest program. I'm happy to share more information. And then some fun stuff that we're doing. We talk about the workforce, and it is in a tight place right now. I feel Tennessee's been fortunate from some other states, but as Dr. Fox said, the numbers are a little bit, not misleading. Oh, they could be misleading, and you all are living it every day. And we're certainly hearing that wages have gone up or going up, will continue to potentially go up, and maybe that shakes out a little bit, but there's certainly some trends that have been accelerated. And going back to how do we continue to train the workforce, invest in our colleges of applied technology and community colleges, all of those are very important conversations that we're having with our partners at the Department of Labor, at higher education, at the Tennessee Board of Regents. And of course, we always talk about engaging the younger generation, and so our partners at TDEC are working on statewide programs about youth and engaging youth in electric vehicles, so that we're starting to build awareness even at a younger age, of course, on the consumer side, but how does this translate to this new workforce that will be required? Of course, you can't hire a fifth grader in your plant today, right? So we're talking kind of about the long-term pipeline of workforce in the state of Tennessee, but we are certainly highly aware that there is a technical need right now, and my hat's off to a lot of our community colleges and TCATs, and even our 4 years. Tennessee Tech, they just sent me their brand new flyer about what they're doing in the EV space to kind of retool some of their engineering students. But of course, that's on the engineering side, not necessarily the production. So that is an active conversation. I am open to feedback. That is something that we are looking at, really focusing on, and making sure that our schools have the proper skill sets and the proper methodologies in place. And also, I don't know, the big news today was Jack Daniels just committed to like the largest green solar program ever with TVA's Green Invest. So even Jack Daniels, I think it's the brown stuff, is going green. So a lot of companies are looking at this, and that's on TNECD's Instagram and social feed. So go check that out. But let me just move on. So, I mean, that was it. That's kind of the high level. We have been very fortunate in Tennessee that we've been fiscally sound throughout all of this pandemic. But of course, I travel across the state, and I live in Nashville. Welcome to my bedroom, everyone. So 2021 of us. But Nashville, the housing market's still going strong. But I would say we're starting to see it. We've been fortunate in Tennessee that housing is going crazy right now because the immigration to our state is super strong, and that's continued to grow because of COVID, maybe in spite of COVID, either way. But of course, housing shortages and housing building materials are all another issue. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm happy to continue to be a partner in automotive. And as we go through the changes in labor workforce and electrification, we want to hear from you all anytime. So.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Victoria. Just a comment, if anybody has a question, please go ahead and put that in the chat box. We'll definitely want to get through that in our remaining time. One question I have, Victoria, we do have a number of people. I mean, obviously we hit probably a bottom in 2020 as far as employment. And so there are some of us, I know I personally, we're having some growth, actually specifically in the EV areas as far as adding headcount. First technical, and then later, probably in the manufacturing space. And we can set up something more specific to go through maybe more details, but can you just comment briefly about incentives and things that are available? We hear all the big things from maybe the big projects like the GM and the Volkswagen. As you know, our membership is maybe a little bit smaller and the numbers are less, but still there is some growth happening. Can you just comment on that?
Sure, no, absolutely. So the state of Tennessee we have kind of two sides of the house: statutory through our Department of Revenue on the tax side, and also discretionary, which is through our department, Economic and Community Development. Yes, there are always big announcements and a big focus on the incentives that come from new projects that get announced. But the thing is, our incentives, Dan, are long-term. If you are a Tennessee company, we are always here to help you with any resources that we can. And sometimes it may not be a tangible financial incentives. We do have, there's some flexible thresholds. We always want to find a way to help. So one, I encourage any company that wants to better understand making sure they're utilizing all of the available tax credits, exemptions on your annual filings in the state of Tennessee. Let me know, be happy to set up, maybe that could be like another kind of virtual meeting to do that. Those are annual credits afforded to any manufacturer in the state of Tennessee. Some linked to job growth, some not, some linked to if you're in a more rural community, you have smaller thresholds, longer time to reach that. And that was a recent change. Just a few years ago, we added a tier 4. When we look at our tier 1s, which are like your Nashvilles and Chattanoogas, down to your tier 4, which is an example, Huntington, Carroll County, we've allowed it for more, a little bit longer lead times on some of the statutory. So I'm happy to work with anyone on that. On the incentive side, really, if you're qualified on the discretionary, if our incentives are designed, yes, to help upfront companies come to the state of Tennessee, but they are long-term to any existing company that is adding headcount. We have to have an accountability agreement to make sure that we are good stewards of our taxpayer dollars as well. But I encourage you to reach out to me. We have a decentralized system of 9 people, of 9 regional offices across the state. So you always have someone in your community that could link you up with any resources as possible. And I'm happy to share that breakdown.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions that came in. One was, how will the Tennessee supply chain be changed with regard to electric vehicles, and what type of changes, do we anticipate with Tennessee ECD?
It's a great question. And I don't have a great answer because it's kind of evolving daily. I will tell you, I remember a couple of years ago that we did so much, there was a lot of tire activity. There was a lot of tire plants coming, some for the OEM market, some for the secondary market. That was kind of, that's Winokian Tires. I was working with them and they announced, but that was a couple of years ago. I spent my morning today learning about carbon nanotubes today, which is like a part of the lithium ion battery, right? I'm not a chemical, I'm becoming more of I'm not an engineer, but I'm becoming more of a chemical scientist this morning. So we're seeing even what I'm just having to learn about the different needs versus, kind of a metal stamper or an engine supplier versus someone who's building building electrolytes or the cathodes or anodes that go in a lithium ion battery. They're different needs. You know, from what I do every day, which is help identify, you know, sites like, you know, we're talking about heavy power, very heavy wastewater, very heavy water usage. All of those things are very different. So there will be changes. I think, you know, I think you all know, I mean, it will be a while before everyone in the United States is driving an electric vehicle. You know, the cars, I mean, you're even seeing the vintage cars come back from, like, you know, everyone wants a Scout now or an International, like, so I think cars, like, there will be this time where we have both vehicles on the road. So I don't, you know, I don't know if it's going to be a super fast transition, but we're certainly seeing a lot of the growth right now on the EV side.
Yeah. Well, one thing maybe we can do, obviously with some of these bigger announcements, we would all of us like to know what kind of support, you know, the new battery plant in GM is going to have, what Volkswagen. So especially the, you know, some of the announcements that have been made, if there's any way we could understand or partner with them to find out what kind of product and service suppliers they need, might be something we can do as a next step. What other question came in? Any exciting new or EV or e-battery manufacturing headed to West Tennessee? We're all, a bunch of us here in Nashville area right now, so maybe the focus and the product is there, but anything coming for West Tennessee that you're aware of?
Yeah, well, there was just an announcement a couple of weeks ago of Mullen Technologies over in Memphis. So there are an EV, they're kind of more of a, it's like a startup, but more established. And I think that's one thing we're navigating right now in this new space of, you know, a lot of companies that are not necessarily new to market. They're getting valued very high, that they're going through a lot of public financing, capital raising, but that's another side. So Mullen Technology is going to be building their car out of Memphis and have a DC across the border in Mississippi, which of course will, while it's across the state line, will certainly have a workforce impact in our state. So that was one possibility. I will tell you, there's a lot of interest. If you start putting dots on maps, which is something that I do on that I-40 corridor west of Nashville, it's really all about supply chain and where customers are. So, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity for West Tennessee. There's some great product out there. And so we're excited about how this could impact the statewide.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time, Victoria. Thank you so much for running short on time, but you know, appreciate all your comments and your partnership with the you know, TAMA and the Chamber. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we just have 1 minute left. I'll just make one comment, and then I would like Ashley Fry, our Executive Director, make a comment. We are working on an annual conference later this year, probably October, November timeframe. The focus is going to be supply chain and probably just be a one-day conference. We're still working out the details as far as location and date, but we really, with all the supply chain just is happening in the last year, we've all, you know, seen that there are some benefits for optimization and partners and support in the supply chain area. So just kind of stay tuned and watch for that. And then last, I'd like Ashley, just if you can make a quick comment. We have our golf outing coming up. So Ashley, go ahead. We can't hear you, Ashley.
Okay, all right. Hopefully you can hear me now. Good. I hope everyone's found this experience interesting and informative. And thank you, Dan, for mentioning the event that we're looking at, not looking, but we're going to do later on this fall. The next event that TAMA has going on is our annual golf event, which is taking place May the 13th here in Murfreesboro. It's a shotgun scramble and starts at 8 o'clock. And we've sent out information related to the, you know, golf registration and sponsorship opportunities. So, you know, this will be the third time we've been in Murfreesboro, and it is just a wonderful course. A good time is had by all. So please shoot a message to me or one of our partners there with the Chamber, either Susie Lusk or Carolyn Davis, for additional information. We're happy to help and look forward to seeing you there.
Excellent. And thanks, Carolyn. I noted you put the link to the golf outing today, as Ashley mentioned, is the last day to get the reduced rate. So we've already got really good sign up coming. And so I don't know how many slots will be left, but everybody, please jump in and sign up there. So, all right. Well, I really appreciate everyone's time, and thank you for joining. I've gotten some really great presentations from two fantastic presenters, and I think it just helps us all understand where the state is headed, both economically and from a development standpoint. So really appreciate everyone joining. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Ashley or I. We'll be happy to answer or make any connections or contacts that you need. So, Carolyn, did I cover everything?